All right, so I'm going to take this from the top, and I'm going to start with the one that is not the driver. So as it says there, we're supposed to create a person class. That person class is supposed to have, 7 variables. First name, which is a string, middle initial, which is a char, last name, which is a string, is gym member, which is a Boolean, height and weight, which are both ints, and BMI, which is a double. All right, so if you look on here, you've got your copy as well. First thing I did was I made these because these were basically the things that I'm going to use to do the validation. Okay, and probably each one of those makes sense. And we've actually talked about all of these different things. But remember, if you have a BMI that's under 18.5, you're considered to be underweight. If you have a BMI that's over 25, all right, between 18.5 between 18.5 and under 25, you're considered to be optimal weight. All right. If you're between 25 and less than 30, all right, you're overweight. And if you're over 30, you're obese. Okay, so that's what I used in there. Hopefully that all makes sense. Now, one thing, if you notice, I'd like you to look up on the screen here if you would. And you notice that I've got these variables here. All right. The reason I'm telling you that is when I go over to the driver, notice I've got basically the same variables. What we're going to do next week when we go over Chapter 10 and we talk about inheritance, one of the things that we're going to talk about is building a separate file called an interface file, which is just a non-executable Java file, and we'll put all this stuff in there. And then we'll have both of those two classes, both the driver class and the non-driver class, will implement those files. Then they have access to those variables. So I don't have to go and put those in there multiple times. All right, that's the key thing. All right, so that's the fix that I'm talking about. Now, the only way that I could get this stuff to work, just so you know, and maybe you didn't get this far, I don't know, because I don't know what people did. It's funny, Charles, I think, thinks that I should do a better job of walking around and being a cop with all of you. He does do that. All right, but the thing is, it's easier for him to do that because of the kind of stuff that they're doing. I mean, they're doing hardware stuff. You know, if somebody's just sitting there and their machine's not on, he's got a pretty good idea that they're not doing anything. All right? I don't like playing cop. I can do it if I have to, but I really don't like doing it. All right? But if you notice, and I don't like doing this, but I made all of these variables public. That was the only way I could access them, was by making them public. Now, can you do it another way? I'm sure you can. Not sure why I had to, but I did. So this will be the shortest person. This will be the tallest person. All right. This will be the total height. So when I want to get the average height, I will take the total number of inches and divide it by 25. All right. When I want the whole weight, I will take their total pounds and divide them by 25. Does that make sense? All right. And notice that for the shortest, I set it to 85. And for the tallest, I set it to 59, meaning the first time I read in the first person, they will become both the shortest person and the tallest person. They will also become the lightest person and the heaviest person based on what we put in there. It has to happen. All right? And then I have this other thing here for the total BMI. All right, so that's to start. All right. Then next, says create a single constructor which passes in and uses the randomly generated values for each of the attributes listed above except for the BMI. So in other words, if you take a look at that, these are my instance variables. So each person that comes in there will have a first name, a middle initial, a last name. They will or will not be gym members. They will have a height. They will have a weight, they will have a BMI, they will have a BMI status. Now, that should make sense to everybody in here. All right, that's the people's individual information. So then in the constructor, I said you pass in basically everything. So there's the first name, the middle initial, the last name, the is gym member, the height, and the weight. All right. I guess I didn't. The BMI and the status are both calculated, so they wouldn't be passed in. All right. And I just got a whole bunch of setters right here. Set first name, set middle initial, set last name, set gym member, set height, set weight, set BMI, and set BMI status. We're going to go through all those in just a minute. Okay? Then what I do is for every time you read in a height and a weight, I figure whether they're bigger or smaller than the current height or weight. All right? And that's what that determined shortest is. Okay? And then basically that is it. So most of the getters are pretty self-evident. Get first name, okay. And I followed Ethan's lead. I chose getters and setters. So it did the getter, then the setter, then the getter, then the setter. All right, so that's why they're like this. Let's just look at the getters first. The get first name, nothing special. The get middle initial, nothing special. The get last name, nothing special. Okay. Notice, you may or may not have noticed, this was a getter. But notice it didn't say get is. It literally named that is gym member for me. All right. The get height, the get weight, and that's it for the getters. So there was nothing special to do with those. All right. So then what I did, the question got asked before about validation. Well, again, I did say if the first name is equal to nothing, set it to UFN for unknown first name. Otherwise, it's okay. All right, same kind of thing for the last name. Now, the middle initial was different. You can't use the dot equals. For the middle initial, you got to do this. Okay? Now, you may or may not know this, but I don't know if you've ever tried to do this or not, but if you look up on the screen here, see where I've got this char middle initial? Everybody see this right here? There is no such thing as an empty string for chars. Watch what happens. If I say equals, I get an error because the character has to hold something. All right, so I looked basically how would you do the equivalent of an empty string for a char. I looked it up online, and that's what they told me, was to choose the character dot min value. All right, and basically that's kind of saying if there is nothing in there, I just put a period in. I could have left it blank or just put a blank space in, but I just decided to put in a period. All right, otherwise it's a valid middle initial. For the gym membership, I just checked for true and for false. If you're going to do that for Booleans, you don't check for double quote true double quote and double quote false double quote, because that's checking for strings. All right? The height and the weight, we've done things like this before. So the height between the minimum and the maximum, if it is, set it. Otherwise, I just set it to the min height. We could have set it to whatever we wanted to. Also notice that every time I set a height, I read that height that's been set in to the total H, which is my total height. All right? And I do the same thing for the weight. Then the BMI basically is, you know how to do this already. Okay? I'll tell you something, I don't mind making fun of myself. It's pretty easy to do anyway. But for some reason, this morning, I did this. I didn't even realize I did this, but I typed in here 703. Okay? I typed that in. And I don't know, that thing was yellow. And for the life of me, I couldn't put together the fact that I had 703 in there, and I kept thinking, what the hell is that yellow for? And I spent 10 minutes trying to figure out why it was yellow. And then I looked and said, oh, geez, it's up in the search bar there. I wonder if I clear that. Sure enough, then it went away. All right. All right. Then for the BMI status, Again, I said basically if it's less than 18, it's here. If it's less than 25, you're optimal. If it's less than 30, you're overweight. Otherwise, you're obese. Does that make sense? The determined shortest, again, whatever one just got read in there, I said, is it shorter than the one that's currently in there? If it is, it becomes the new shortest. All right, otherwise, all right. So if shortest is less than H, I could have done it the other way and said H less than shortest. It doesn't matter. And I did the same thing for tallest, but it's a greater than. I did the same thing for lightest, but it's weight. And the same thing for heaviest, but it's greater than. All right? Then I went back and I overrode the two-string method. You should be getting used to by now, except for the BMI and the status, all those other variables, all of these variables that are in here had get methods, correct? When you are doing your test next week, I will expect you to generate the get methods and the set methods. I will expect you to use them in here. And if you don't, I'll be looking for stuff like that. All right? Because there's a right way and a wrong way to do things. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying, and you know what, this is the best program that's ever been written. Because it sure as heck is not. All right? And that's it. Any questions whatsoever on the class itself? So I'll put this up there for just a second. Yes.
Explain the standalone sets, the setters that we have without the getters, like the reasoning. You're returning void.
Yeah. Well, the question was, the question was explain the setters you have without getters. Okay? All right. In here, I have at least one, if not two setters without getters. The BMI was, and I think the status was. All right?
I get it when I need to use them, but I don't.
Yeah, I really think I do understand what you're saying. Yeah. Okay? Typically, the book recommends that you use the word get for those, and you never even have setters. And you always do the calculation right in there. That's the way they showed it in class. Yeah. That's what they recommended in class.
You have a return type?
Yes. I had a problem doing that.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
I had some weird problems when I did some of these, or some of this. Occasionally I'd run into a weird quirk. I tried something that I did last time, and I did it exactly the same way, and it didn't work. And I checked the error message, which didn't make any sense for the error I was getting. So I removed it and then put it back again, and then it worked. There was no typo though. Nothing was being flagged as being a typo. So what was wrong? It was one of those things where I wish I'd known. All right. Now, one thing that we probably should be doing here that we're not, but one thing that we probably should be doing is we should be incorporating Git in with what we're working on, because there's a chance, and I don't know, because again, I haven't even written your test Tuesday. You're going to take two more tests. You're going to take one next week for 6, 7, 8, and maybe a little bit of 9. We'll see. I mean, this had the character dot thing in it, but then you're going to take another one for 11 and 12. I might have you do stuff based on the same program, and it would be kind of nice if you would version control it. All right, that would be good for you, and it would be a good exercise for you. I'm going to try to look by next week, even over the weekend if I get time, to see if there's good documentation out there about using version control with IntelliJ IDEA. There probably is. Virtually every software package that's like this allows you to use version control, and there's a reason for doing that. All right? And I want you to also understand, it may sound real simple, and maybe it is. But literally what it's referred to as is, let's say we're all working on this project, and let's assume that rather than this being a few hundred lines, it's several thousand lines long. The idea is when we were looking at that before, and if you remember, we talked about making copies, kind of forking it. The idea then is we are working with our own copies. All right? And the system will make sure that if I try to go and return mine and Ethan's trying to return his copy at the same time, it will handle it. The chances of us being able to submit our jobs at exactly the same time to the same millisecond are virtually impossible. All right? But it's something that you should be looking at, because I'm not going to be surprised if you go out and start interviewing, if they're going to expect you know how to use version control with whatever kind of software you're using. If version control is available, they'll expect you to use it. All right? Yes.
Is a list of type void?
Pardon?
Is a list of type void? Because I have that one setter. I have a setter that's, I have to return a list.
Okay.
Whenever I did the reverse on the list. But I can't put it, like I can't do void on my set numbers descending and then have a getter.
Well, are you asking if it has to be like that? Not to my knowledge.
It just wouldn't take it, like as it, like put the return into a getter. I had to do it out of a setter only.
Yeah, and
Just like that, and I don't know why.
I don't either. All right.
That's why.
One thing I was thinking of having you do for this assignment, maybe I mentioned this to one or two of you the other day, I don't know, was to have you work with an array list in this. But as I got going in this was plenty big. All right, at least I thought it was. Now I'm trying to slowly work my way through this so that if anybody wants to see it, they can see all of the code. And especially for Valerie and for Brady, that stuff will be out there. All right, and I hope to finish this, and get this out there so that pretty close to right after the end of class, they can take a look at it if they want to. All right, yes.
So you're determining shortest, tallest, so on. Those are all custom methods and not setters?
Yes, the question was, yeah, because those it's a good question. The variables that we had here, these are the variables that each person will have. These are variables that they all share. And when they're shared like that, no, you don't have getters and setters for them. No. Now, if I had somebody in here who is a professional Java programmer, they might raise their hand and say, oh yeah, but on occasion, and maybe they'd probably be right. But the way I was taught this is when you do your getters and when you do your setters, that all of your getters and all of your setters will just be on your instance variables. All right? But again, it's almost too blanket of a statement to say, well, you'll never do this, because as soon as somebody says that, somebody else goes out and tries to prove them wrong. All right? And believe me, and I'm not being funny here, it's not that hard to prove me wrong. All right? So again, I'm just perusing my way down through here, and then we'll talk about the driver in just a second. Again, I went kind of nuts with the driver. Sorry about that. All right. I'm not sure what we'll even be working on, but probably if you got to do this, I'm not that worried about a middle initial. I may have you use this list again for first name and last name, and maybe something like an account number or something where you'd have to generate it. All right, or I'd give you a list. I don't think the code is that difficult, and I think that really, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. I would think you can all understand what it's doing. All right? We're just randomly generating, in this case, a first name and a last name, or a first name and a middle initial and a last name. We want to do that. All right? And the reason that I did that, face it, when we had our setters, you could, everybody hear this? You could, in a setter, put in a system.out.print statement where you said, please enter your name here, right? We could do that. But what we're doing is for lack of better words, we're almost mimicking using a file with what we're doing. Because I've had problems getting files to work with this. And I just didn't have enough time to go around and try to fix it. So rather than files, I'm hard coding in values, and then we're just grabbing them, all right? And we're grabbing them randomly, so that ideally at least, so that every time we run the application, all right, so every time we run the application, we're going to get a different output. Now again, it's not mandatory that you do that. I wanted to show you too, if you look up here, it says I've got 40 warnings and 7 typos. All right. Now, the typos are what you'd expect. For instance, there is no word in their dictionary called output str. Does that make sense? So when it sees it the first time, it flags it. But with a lot of these warnings that are here, they'll come back and they'll say, it says field can be made into a local variable. All right. When people program, whether you realize this or not, after a while, you start to develop your own programming style. You do. Now, you may go to work for a company that says you got to do it like this and like this and like this, but the actual algorithm and the way you figure out how to do something is typically up to you. All right, and I probably told you this, but I'll always remember that when I got hired at AT&T, the guy asked me, he said, do you know the C programming language? Because that's what they used. And I said, no. And the guy he said, like, good. And I thought, well, wouldn't that be a bad thing? Wouldn't you want me to come in with experience? And he said, no. I said, why? He said, North Central College, which was right down the road from where I was working, he said, they have a class in C. We want you to enroll. We'll pay for it. I said, okay. And they said, yeah, but it's even better than that. It's taught by one of our programmers. So when we teach you C, we teach you how to program C the AT&T way. See what I'm saying? That's what they wanted. All right. But still, when you come in here, you are developing your own style, so to speak. And the bottom line is, I'll take your question in a second, and I just want to make sure you hear this, because I've been doing a lot of reading about hiring, etc. Because I like it when I'm able to give you information that ideally, at least, when you leave here, you might be able to use it. And what a lot of these places are saying today is what they want is people with a good mind. All right? So in other words, Amin goes for a job, and he doesn't even know why he's applying for it, but it's for a Python programmer. And he doesn't know Python. But he's like, what the hell? So he just applies for the job. And he gets an interview. There's a chance he could get hired with his skill set, because they're not looking for a Python programmer. They're looking for a programmer who can solve problems. And if you can prove you can solve problems in one language, then typically all you have to do is learn the syntax of the other language, because you're still using the same kind of algorithms. When I hear that, what people have told me before, students will come back, yeah, I was going to apply for this job, but I didn't think I was qualified. Says who? All right? Half the battle when you go in there is how much confidence you have during the interview. And I don't mean you walk in there and you're like, again, I'm sorry if I probably have told you this, but I still remember my student Jamil. And he said, Jeff, he's from India, just a terrific guy and really smart. And I said, how'd the interview go? And he goes, well, it was weird. I said, well, why? And he said, well, the first part went really well. And I thought we were getting along great. I was answering their questions. And then he asked me if I had any questions. And I said, no, but I have a comment. And the guy said, okay. And he said, I was looking at your website, and it's not very good, but I've got some suggestions for you. And he pulled out a piece of paper with suggestions. I said, that's not a real good way to get hired. You wouldn't think that if, God forbid this would ever happen, but if I was ever drafted, let's say, by the St. Louis Blues, and I can barely skate, so it wouldn't happen anyway. But if that ever happened, and I was brought up to their main team, and I was being introduced to the guys the first day, I probably wouldn't sit there and say, you know what, you've all been skating incorrectly, but don't worry, because I'm going to show you how you should skate. All right? But that said, you should go into a job interview confident. Again, I'm sorry if I hit the same stories at you all the time, but I'll always remember when I went into my first interview, and I had not graduated yet. It was with the Manitowoc Company in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. It was a programming position. It was a language I knew. That was all the good news. The bad news is we didn't have an internet back then, and I never even looked up to see what the Manitowoc Company made. That's how stupid I was. All right? And the guy's interviewing me, and he goes, "You don't have an effing clue." And he didn't say effing. He said, "What we make here, do you?" And I said, "Nope." And he told me they make ice machines, which was fine. But I thought it probably really didn't help me a lot in their eyes that I didn't even take the time to research the company. So they're looking for somebody who can talk. Communication is a big skill as much as they're looking for somebody who can code. You had a question a long time ago, Colin.
Why don't the instance variables have a public or private?
Question was, why don't the instance variables have a public or private? I believe they default to private. All right. I don't think it would hurt anything to put private in front of them. Any other questions on this part? All right, then let's look at the driver.
Why are the other ones public?
The question was, why are the other ones public? And I take it you mean the ones here.
Yep.
Because I couldn't get the program to work any other way.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know why.
But they're supposed to be private, right?
In an ideal world, there's actually four different access modifiers in this language, just so you know. You know what public is, or you kind of know what public is. You know what private is, and you kind of know what private is. We'll hit on protected next week because it deals with inheritance. But there's another one that's called package. And normally that's the default. And if you look up on the screen here,
The default for what?
that's your, for when you create variables, if you don't put a type on them. Package means that, remember this package that we created up here on the left? That means that the whole package knows what the variables do. Okay? All right. So, for the driver, I did some formatting, so I put in the decimal format. I did some randomizing, so I put that in. And I used the J option pane, so we've got the import JavaX, etc. And again, what I want you to understand, if you look up on the screen here, all I'm talking about is taking these variables right here. All right, these variables that are right here appear here, and they appear here. If I take those they're constants, they're not variables, but if I take those constants out, put them in a new file. This is what we're going to do next week, okay? We're going to put those constants in a new file. And then what we're going to say is, for example, public class person, let's say we've got a file that we create. It's going to be called something, in this case, like iPerson.java. The I means interface, okay? Then I'm going to say implements iPerson. Whoops, that's spelled person right. Now I get an error because I don't have that file. All right? And you might say, okay, that's fine. Why do you do that? Well, come back next week and we're going to be going over why you do that. Okay? When you come in here on Wednesday, I'm going to lecture on Chapter 10. And after I lecture on Chapter 10, we're going to write a program with inheritance for Chapter 10. All right? We probably won't finish both the lecture and the program in one period. It'll probably spill into the next day. And then we'll jump into exceptions right away, and we'll add to that same program. All right? Then ideally, at least, and this is the only part I have not done yet, all right, I've created a couple simple GUIs for you, but I'd like to take this whole program and make the whole program GUI. All right? Then we've kind of come full circle, because you talked about basic Java, you talked about object-oriented programming, you'll have talked about the inheritance part of object-oriented programming and the interface, and we'll have done exception handling, and then we'll do the GUI stuff. The only thing that would be left would be to put it all in a database. We don't have time to do that. All right? We can look at the database stuff, and I actually have already done lectures on it, put them out there on the YouTube channel if you want to see that. All right? All right. I don't think this needs any other extra explanation, does it? The first name, this is the one I asked you to create. And here's the last name. And there's seeding the rand. And since they're all going to interface directly or indirectly with main, that's why they're all static. All right? So this, you might find any or all of these confusing, but what each one of those variables in blue are is it's going to give me a number between 0 and 50, 0 and 50, and 0 and 49, 0 and 49, and 0 and 25. So let's say that let's assume that when I do this, this gives me 3, okay? I'm making it up because it's an easy one. So that means if it gives me 3, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to grab 0, 1, 2, 3. So that person's first name will be Rosario. All right? Then when I go and generate a number between 0 and 25 for the middle name, okay, let's say it gives me 6. Well, then I'll have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it will be G for the middle initial. And then let's say we do it for the last name and we get 4. Then it'll be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Whoops, wrong one. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it'll be Rosario G Andrade. Does that make sense? That just says that every time we run the program, the chances are really good we could run this program thousands of times and never have the exact same combinations. Because think about it. What are the chances? What are the chances of you know 1 out of 50 times 1 out of 50 times 1 out of 26? That's a pretty, infinitesimal number. It's much less than 1% that's going to happen. That what I'm saying is that you'll get 2 records that have the exact same information. And let's say you do. Let's say you do get 2 people that have the same first name, the same middle initial, and the same last name. All right? Now, what's the chances that they're going to have the same height and the same weight? Because the weight goes from 100 to 300, all right, which is about 200 possibilities, and the height goes from 60 to 84, which is about 25. So if I take all that and multiply it by that and multiply it by that, it's probably not going to happen. If I ran millions and millions of combinations, it could potentially happen, all right, but it probably won't. All right, so I asked, and you said, everybody said that you all understand what this is, correct? Okay, this one, I will tell you that much of the documentation online just sucks. It just does. I had one of the first year students talk to me yesterday and he said, I was at home and I've been trying to teach some of this stuff to myself, getting ahead a little bit. And I went out to this site and I found some samples and they said, this has been tested, and they weren't. I think you might have said that the other day too, with some of the stuff you found. All right. And I said, it's the way it is. All right. People put stuff out there and they say that that it works. And sometimes people believe it and sometimes they don't. All right.
It's 'cause they said it and forget it,
Oh yeah, you're right. That is what a lot of it is. All right. And sometimes the thing takes on a life of its own. All right. But, we live in a weird world. I heard our president a while back say that he gets some of his news from the National Enquirer. That scared the crap out of me. All right. Okay. This right here is going to end up generating a 0 or a 1. Right there. If it generates a 0, it's false. They're not a member of a gym. If it generates a 1, it's true. They are a member of a gym. Does that make sense? All right. This just says generate a number that falls between 60 and 84. This says generate a number that falls between 100 and 300. So once I get down to this line right here, once I get down to line 80, what that says is I now have a random value for each one of these fields. That's what I wanted. So this right here, and I skipped over it, I didn't mean to. Hopefully you all get that. That's creating a new array. But it's not initializing it. It's kind of like, let's assume for a second, I'm going to remove it right away. Let's say that I wanted to create an array called grades, okay? If I did this, if I said int, bracket, bracket, let's say it was for you guys. In fact, let's pretend there's 10 of you. And I'll say equals new int 10, all right? That just creates an array that'll hold 10 whole numbers. It doesn't put anything in there. So in much the same way, this holds an array that's going to hold 10 of those objects, but there's nothing in there yet. We've actually we're generating the values we want to put into it right there. All right? And then once we've done that, then we say, hey, take all those values for the current person and fill the stuff up. All right? Once you filled it up, print it back out again. Okay? And notice all it says there is J option pane, all right, and it's got the name of the element. Okay? Well, all that does is it calls to string. Okay? And we'll go over that in just, actually maybe we've looked at that already, I don't remember. This is the stuff that prints at the end. Now, I was a little, for lack of better words, cheesy here. This probably should have been put into its own variable where I took the total height and divided it by 10. I didn't do it. I did it right in there, okay? And I did the same thing with the weight. Is that a good thing? And I did the same thing with the BMI? Probably not, all right? And then finally, again, print all that stuff out. All right, so then we have our individual routines right here. This routine appeared to work, all right? There's so many different ways to generate random numbers, and a lot of them I tried weren't working. I was trying to do the one for 0 and 1, and I took something right from online, literally. And I ran it, and the first time it gave me 10 true. Then I ran it again, it gave me 10 false. I'm thinking, something's wrong here. All right? So this should give me a random number ideally between 0 and 49. This should give me ideally a random number between 0 and 25. So that's 0 to 49. Notice this. Notice that name. It looks a little funky. Get FNLN num. I call both of those, I call the same routine from here and from here because both those arrays have 50 values in them. And when I first did it, I wrote a separate routine which was exactly the same. The two routines were exactly the same. And I thought, wasn't that stupid? Rather than writing two routines that are exactly the same, I should write one routine and call it twice. It sure made more sense to me. So that's what I did. All right. Now, this one was a little different. This is the one I had problems with. I thought it'd be the easiest one, getting a number between 0 and 1. So I changed it to this. I said, give me any random integer you want between 0 and 100. All right? Then take that number, whatever's generated, and modulo it by 2. So divide it by 2, and if the remainder is 0, okay, I said return false, otherwise return true. So I'm handling, it's the equivalent of saying I'm handling even numbers as though they're not gym members, and odd numbers as though they are gym members. Does that make sense? All right. I'm sure there's a way to do this. I just did it wrong. I tried doing it 4 ways. I went and used 4 different references, and then I went and looked through some of my old programs, and it wasn't working. So finally I said, the hell with it. I'm just going to write my own. And that's what I did. This is not in a book, not that I know of. Nobody probably want to claim it anyway. This was to give me a random integer for the height. This was a random integer to give me something for the weight. All right. Now, notice they are called get height, etc. Those are not setters and getters. I made those. Setters and getters are in your class file, not in your driver. I'm sure that a professional Java programmer who looked at this program would probably puke and say, you never make a driver file that's that big. Well, I just wanted you to get practice doing a lot of this different stuff. That's why I did it. All right. And that was it. So again, the idea is if I take this and run it, I'm going to get 10 people here. There's the first one, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th. And what the program should be doing is for each one of those heights, it added it to that variable called total H. For each one of those weights, it added it to the variable called total W. For each one of the BMIs, it added it to the variable called total BMI. Now when I click OK, it's going to take each one of those, the total H, the total W, and the total BMI, it's going to divide each one of them by 25, and it's going to tell me what the averages are. Plus, as I went through the program, remember we had that get shortest, so it was checking for the shortest one each time. All right? So there's the output. Now, the only thing is I didn't do much formatting on this, so it's always coming out with a whole number. That isn't great, but it was okay for what I was doing. The other thing I want to tell you about this is if everybody would just stop what you're doing and just take a look up here, because for some reason people don't think about doing this. All right? So let's assume for a second that I'm going to go into this routine right here. Remember we had this routine here that was called where is it? That one right there, shortest? Okay, it's not returning anything, right? There's nothing at all that stops me that's from saying system.out.println. Let's put a \n at the beginning. The current value of shortest is plus shortest. Okay, and that might not look like, what'd you even do that for? I don't get it. I'm going to show you right now. But let me save this. All right, I'm going to jack this thing up here so you can see a lot of it. Now I'm going to run the program again. All right. See what happened? For the first record, 83. For the second record, 76. For the third record, 65. Then it didn't find a smaller one. You can use system.out.println and you can become very good at debugging programs by writing all your stuff with show message dialogues and show input dialogues and just taking, when you have problems, using system.out.println. Enough people don't do that. All right. Many people learn how to code. Few people learn how to code well. All right. I mean, the number of programmers that I have worked with in my life on a scale of 1 to 10 that I'd call them a 10, there's maybe 1 or 2. All right. I sure as hell am not a 10. And the bad thing, and there's actually a good thing about you all concentrating on one language every semester, and that is you're becoming as proficient as you can in that language. You're going to notice as we go into, in a few weeks when we go into the Android stuff, this is just still regular Java stuff. Yeah, it is. Even Kotlin, it's going to be the regular Java stuff. All right. When I taught this stuff at Blackhawk, in one semester, I had students taking 4 different languages with me. All right. And they were going nuts. They just really and truly were going nuts. It was like, and then I started giving a lot of the same programs in the different languages so they would see the similarities, and that was maybe a bad idea. All right. And again, I could do this. I could literally print out the value every time too. So I'm just putting shortest, but if you remember, if we look in here, if you look up on the screen, that right here, what do I have? I have shortest and I have H, right? I could print those out, both of them out every time. And if I did that, then I could see every time what was being passed in. I could do as much of that as I wanted to or needed to do. All right? So we went through that fairly quickly. It may not have seemed like it, but we went through it fairly quickly. I'm not going to say, does everybody understand all that? Again, this is harder than your program, than your test is going to be. All right? It kind of had a mind of its own. It started smaller and it kept growing and growing and growing as I kept writing and writing code. All right? Yes, sir.
So for your driver, you didn't create getters, you made like a custom method and named them with it?
Yes. And that's why maybe even using the word get in here was not a good thing. Not, I mean, in the driver in here. Yeah, you're right. I probably, where are we? Hold on. These things right here, I did not. Could I have done them? You know, could I have done that? Probably. I didn't. I manually put these in. All right? And you'll notice they're all gets too. Okay.
And then would you advise making the name list and the char list and the random outside of the main?
Yeah, I would. I put way too much stuff in main, if that's what you're asking, kind of matter of factly, but yes. I mean, in an ideal world, what I should have done is, for example, this should have been in one routine, this should have been in one routine, this should have been in one routine, and I could have defined those variables there, or above, or whatever, but then main would have been just a driver. And that's what main is ideally supposed to do. All right? And then one of the reasons it's supposed to be a driver is so that you can swap things in and out for either for main or for the rest of the program. Any other questions? All right, so like I said, we'll leave. I don't know what I told you, 4:10 I think you can leave. I shouldn't say that now. That's on tape. Get my butt into trouble now.